hope you're ready for the most insane, heavily detailed, comprehensive overview of the Calathea White Fusion that you have ever seen. Hello, this is Sarah Solid Plant and welcome back to my channel. Calatheas have a reputation for being the most difficult plants to care for. White Fusion is arguably the most temperamental Calathea of them all. I've decided to make an entire video dedicated to the Calathea White Fusion. I've had some experience with White Fusions. I've always had one in the house for the last 2.5 years. It's one of the first plants that really got me into caring for like fancier house plants. I've revived them, I've thrived them, I have seen the high highs and the low lows. To lay out the format of this video a little bit, I will be following this outline. I'll make sure to link timestamps down below for you if you want to jump around to certain sections. When I tell you I did research on these, let's just say I went down a rabbit hole. I literally have 4 printed pages of details to lay out for you. And I did all of this so that, you guys would have the most comprehensive video possible. Also, selfishly tickling that nerd itch in the back of my brain that is always there. So this is my excuse to dig into one of my favorite houseplants of all time. For all of that, I want to make quick introductions to my Calathea White Fusion. If you notice a bunch of yellow leaves, little curling here and there, that is because about a month ago, even though it's in a self-watering pot, I forgot to water it. I swear, if my head wasn't attached, I'd forget it sometimes. It's still gigantic. It's grown so much since I've got it. And if you have any notion that this plant is happy, let me show you something. These are all of the roots that have come out of the bottom of the plant. Holy crapola. This plant for sure is going to be potted up into a bigger pot come spring, but for right now she's doing all right. But if you notice like brown tips and yellow edges and stuff like that, I promise it's just because I didn't water it once a month ago and it's still recovering from that. But overall, this is a very, very luscious, healthy plant. Calathea in general are native to Central and South America, and they're mainly known for the movement of their leaves. At night, they will fold their leaves up, and during the day, they will fold their leaves down. You can see time lapses and things. They're super cool. Calathea prefers moist soil as well as higher humidity. Some can do better without, but they all generally prefer higher humidity. I have a whole video detailing Calathea care tips and going through all the different genus I have. So I will link that down below for you and up in the cards so you can check that out whenever you want. But I have a full video on just general Calathea care, but this one is going to be about the White Fusion. White Fusion are actually not found in the wild. They were invented and developed by Thailand Yam in 2007 in a greenhouse in Malaysia. The new species was then tested for stabilization, reproduction, propagation in Florida until it was available for commercial sale in 2012. They then filed a patent in 2013 and it was approved in 2015. So they actually have a patent on this particular plant. So the White Fusion is actually a brand new species of Calathea. It's only a teenager. The botanical classification is Leitzei Fusion White, because Leitzei is the closest species they have to this particular plant, even though they're a little bit different. If you're interested in reading the entire patent like I did, I will link it down below. It's not too long. You can go check it out. The variegation on the White Fusion is very stable and unique to this plant. Even across other Calathea, Stramanthe, Maranta, the variegation is very unique. On the foliage, the broad splashes of white to green give this sort of brush stroke effect. It really reminds me of like your Renoir, Cezanne, Manet, and other Impressionist painters from the Renaissance era. Each leaf is unique to the plant, almost like a snowflake. Truly, truly beautiful plant. As you've probably noticed during the video, the back sides of the leaf have this very sort of iridescent, just sort of whisper of that purple. It's like a little translucent almost, and you have to hit it at the right light to even see it. It's so beautiful. This whole plant is absolute gorgeous. I totally get the obsession, and I am in that camp of being obsessed. For water, water your Calathea White Fusion with distilled water. I know it's annoying. I know it's awful. Trust me when I say distilled water is the way to go. What I do is I buy the big 2.5 gallon containers of distilled water from the grocery store. It usually runs me about $2.50, and I buy a couple of those at a time, and it lasts me a couple of months for all of my Calathea. So if you bought one of those for one Calathea White Fusion, it would probably last you quite a long time. You could also use bottled or filtered water, but a word of caution if you use filtered water. Maggie wants snuggle time right now. Apparently she just wants all the attention. Even after I filter my water for my other plants, I still have fluoride in there, as well as the pH is always a little bit high, so I have to adjust it. So just be aware that if you're using filtered water, that doesn't mean it's necessarily still good for plants. It just kind of takes out some of those harder minerals. White Fusions really don't like their roots disturbed, so I would highly recommend keeping your White Fusions in the nursery pot as long as possible until you have to repot and upsize or something's drastically wrong. I would definitely just leave it in the nursery pot as long as possible. I would also recommend getting a self-watering pot. This is the one I have. It doesn't have to be this one, but I like this one because it can keep the White Fusion in its nursery pot and then just plop it right in the center. I learned quickly that taking care of plants, for me, I can be a little absent-minded and I can forget about things. The White Fusion has about a 3 to 4 day window where it'll go from dry at 1 day, and then 3 to 4 days later it'll get into droopy and in danger. So you definitely want to water them before they get to that limp and droopy and sad. Otherwise you start having other issues. When I forgot to water it and it got all these, yellow leaves and things like that, that is 100%. It was droopy, and then I noticed it, and then I watered it. These are a little different than, say, a pothos or a Fittonia, where if they get droopy, that's just an indicator that you should water them. If it does get droopy, just water it right away and know that you're probably going to lose a couple of leaves at the base, and that you're going to have more yellowing leaves, more crispy edges, more brown tips. Even with my self-watering pot, I managed to do the same thing, but without this, I would be in way worse situation than I am now. This gives me a lot of peace of mind, and I make sure all of my picky Calatheas are in a self-watering pot. However, whatever mechanism you want in order to get it self-watering, I would highly recommend that. For temperature, typical room temperature is fine. You want to make sure you stay above 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius. Houseplants like it to be above 60, so Calatheas are no different. Because of how sensitive and dainty Calatheas are, I would personally recommend not buying or shipping Calathea during winter months. They're very sensitive to the cold and honestly just sensitive in general. If you're buying locally during the winter, I would just keep those leaves and the plant protected as much as you can. Wrap the outside in paper, put it in a bag, all of those things. Try to keep it as warm as possible and don't let the cold drafts hit the leaves if you can help it. Humidity is absolutely key for the White Fusion. I've heard conflicting reports on the humidity levels in order to keep this plant happy. I can only speak to my own personal experience with humidity and my White Fusions. I'll give you my sort of breakdown of the different humidity levels, but what I do with mine is I have my little indoor greenhouse that I use for all of my fancier plants that I'm afraid I'm going to kill. And the Calathea White Fusion is in there in my little indoor greenhouse. Generally speaking, it is 70 to 80%, but the air never drops below 60%. This high of a humidity is not required to keep your Calathea happy, but it will up your chances of the White Fusion thriving. For White Fusions and other Calatheas, all new leaves that are produced while in your house are already used to your conditions and will already be okay in those conditions. It's all those leaves have ever known. The new leaves coming up in your care are going to be way more robust than the leaves that they are replacing. So if you lose leaves early on, or if you don't have the conditions right in the beginning and it starts to die back, don't worry. Calathea are basically the little engine that could. They're Tinkerbell. You have to believe in them, and then they will grow, and then they will thrive, and then they will get big and beautiful and lush. And trust me, the struggle is worth the reward. The White Fusion prefers medium to high indirect light, keyword meaning indirect. You do not want direct sun exposure on the leaves if you can help it. Like I said, my White Fusion is in a greenhouse. It is actually sitting on the floor, so it gets very, very little window light. But what it does have is each of my shelves has a T5 light, and it gives my White Fusion about 400 foot candles or 675 lumens of light. And I have that light on a timer because, like I said, if my head wasn't attached, I would forget it. I have that light on a timer, so it's on 14 hours a day. The more light you give a White Fusion, the more white will appear, but you will also see diminishing returns on the beautiful purple undersides. You'll notice when you look at the plant from the top, some of these at the top have a little bit more white than the ones underneath, but I kind of like it, and the purple is still there, so I'm giving it sufficient light. I also have one leaf that is almost completely white with just the teeniest amount of color to it. So that is also possible. If you see a lot of leaves that are all white like that, definitely change the light situation, but that's the only one on this particular plant that I've noticed, so I think I'm in the clear. As if all the care instructions aren't enough, one of the biggest things with this plant that I've personally struggled with is pest control. I have definitely encountered spider mites with my White Fusion. I have been lucky in that I have not experienced thrips or mealybugs or really anything else with the White Fusion, just spider mites. And the spider mites are totally treatable. This exact plant had spider mites a couple of months ago. I want to say like 6 months ago, something like that. And you treat it well. I'll link some videos for you down below. I also, in my Instagram story, I highlighted when I was working on treating some of my plants for spider mites. So there's a bunch of resources out there. You can use whatever you choose for your spider mite treatment. What I do and what I do with my Calatheas, because these leaves are so delicate, they're so paper thin, you can't be too harsh with them. I've heard that neem oil can damage White Fusion leaves. I don't know that for a fact, but that's what I've heard. But I've used 50-50 alcohol water mixture to clean the leaves. Totally fine. I've used Captain Jack's on this a ton. I personally use Captain Jack's as my pest prevention of choice. I don't know if it's the best thing for it, but I know it definitely works. And I know it's done well for me, so I'm just going with it. It does not leave any sort of haze or residue on the leaves. So you have the full treatment that you'll do if you happen to have spider mites on it and you need to treat for it. Absolutely do the thorough top to bottom treatment like you normally would. But I actually do a preventative treatment on my Calatheas just to make sure everything's good. I have had so many spider mites in my house, it is ridiculous. It's a constant battle. So what I do is once a month, usually, like I'll pick an evening and I will just spray down every single Calathea I own, this one included. I will spray it until it is dripping, sopping wet, and then I leave it there. It usually has plenty of time to dry by the morning, and then repeat the next month. I'd recommend doing your treatments at night just to prevent any sort of possible light trauma when you've got all the spray and different liquids on your leaves. Pick a random evening, spray down your Calathea. Heck, spray down all your plants if you want, but for this one, I definitely do that because it is a magnet for all things bugs and spider mites, just because those leaves are so delicate and so they're just munchable. Another thing to make note with pests is when your plant is under stress, it is way more likely to have pest issues in conjunction or because of the stress that your plant is under. If you have one of those situations where you've underwatered your plant and it's droopy, do a treatment. Not necessarily a full treatment, but do the full spray down until it's dripping wet. Definitely do that after you water it, because when the plant is under stress, it is way more susceptible to bugs of all kinds, especially spider mites. Also, if you keep the plant in lower humidity, it's also more susceptible to spider mites. So let's say your plant is stressed due to either low humidity or underwatering. Do a thorough treatment, maybe twice that week when you catch it, just to give it like extra care. And always check it. Always check it. Check the undersides of the leaves. Make sure that they're clean every time you water, every time you're in the area. Just give it a little, you know, I'm a leaf petter, I'm a leaf toucher, so I'm touching the plants anyway. Might as well be looking for bugs at the same time. Since the White Fusion is so delicate and so sensitive, fertilizer can very easily burn the plant, so I dilute it a lot. I use different organic fertilizers for all of my plants. For this one, I basically take my fish fertilizer and then I dilute it to like a 1/10 or even a 20th, because these things do not need that much fertilizer, I promise. You know, I'm in the middle of December. I have not fertilized this plant since, I don't know, September, something like that. For these, it's much better to err on the side of under fertilizing than over. Generally, you will not see any ill effects from under fertilizing aside from maybe slightly less growth. But if you over fertilize, you will get burns on the leaves and things like that. So definitely dilute your organic fertilizer much further than you do for your other plants, and maybe fertilize every other watering. Whatever you do, don't over fertilize. Err on the side of under fertilizing. You'll be better in the long run. For crispy leaves, for ugly leaves, do yourself a favor and leave them on as long as you can stand it. I will keep leaves on the plant that have crispy edges, yellowing, all that sort of stuff for as long as humanly possible. If around 50 to 60% of the leaf is unaffected, it can still photosynthesize, I will leave it on the plant. Every single leaf you leave on the plant will help it revitalize itself, will help it grow, will give itself the energy it needs to sort of rehab itself. I've taken a leaf off just for demonstration purposes, but this is kind of what a curled leaf looks like. You can get a little bit of yellowing, things like that, but generally this is what you'll see if you have some stress on the plant, or it had some stress in the past and now it doesn't anymore. I have heard that you could take scissors and sort of cut off the sort of affected areas and it'll stop the browning. I haven't necessarily found that to be true. I've tried trimming Calathea leaves in the past, including White Fusion leaves, and all I've noticed is that it starts browning from where you cut it as opposed to where it was on the edge before. So you can certainly try that if you want. If you can't stand seeing things like this, and if you would otherwise cut the whole leaf off, try trimming it off. I haven't found it to be a long-term solution, but if it keeps the leaf on your plant and that's what works for you, do it. Let's say your White Fusion is acting up and you're panicking and you're trying to figure out what the problem is. First, above all, check the soil. If it is even remotely dry, especially the top of the soil, if it is very crumbly and it's dry, water it. Second, you want to check for pests. Anytime your plant is stressed or sad, check for pests and do a quick spray treatment for pests just in case. Steps 1 and 2, I do every single time, no matter what the issue ends up being. Those are the 2 things you want to check no matter what. 3, check if your soil is compacted, because that could mean that you're strangling your roots or waterlogging your roots. So double check if you have compacted soil. 3, check your light conditions. If it's unhappy because it's burning, that means it's getting too much light. If it is droopy and sad and not growing, it's generally because you don't have enough light. So just check your light conditions to make sure that it's not getting any direct sun and it's getting sufficient indirect light. 5th, you want to check for humidity. Make sure your conditions are good for your plant. You can get one of these little humidity meters and double check in your area around the Calatheas if your humidity is high enough. Just like a daily check type of thing. If you have consistently brown tips and brown edges, you're always going to have some. It's a Calathea, you're always going to have like the odd one here or there, but if it's really consistent, are you watering sufficiently and enough? Are you watering with distilled water, and do you have high humidity? Those are the 3 things that will keep your leaves from crisping up, aside from, you know, pests, fungus, things like that. Thank you so much for watching my video. Hopefully you learned something about the Calathea White Fusion today that you didn't otherwise. Maybe after this video, you're like, I will never touch one of these in my life. This is not for me. Or you're like, you know what? It sounds like the kind of fun challenge that, you know, I need. I am definitely excited to have this plant in my collection. I am excited that it is just like blowing up. It's about doubled in size since I got it a few months ago. It's currently in a 4-inch pot and I'm going to be upsizing it to a 6. And I'm really, really excited to kind of have this plant expand and grow. It is one of my ultimate favorites. I think it is one of the most beautiful plants on the planet. I love it to death, and I hope you love it too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!